Well, welcome back to our lecture series on focus groups. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about some basic focus group techniques. And I'm just going to put this picture up here just to remind us of what a focus group generally entails, which is people sitting around a table talking about things. Very meeting-like, very business-like. And I think that because of this very familiar setting, focus groups really make a lot of sense to the corporate world. This is maybe one of the reasons why they're so popular, because observing people having a meeting is not that far removed from having a meeting yourself. And in fact, often in the back room of a focus group, the observers themselves are having a discussion about what they're watching go on in a group, and then they have a meeting afterwards to discuss what they saw. It's very much a part of our corporate structure, and it's a lot different from other forms of research that we do that are much more focused on hearing individual opinions and then bringing them together. In a focus group, it's more about hearing a group of people talk all at once and coming away with some kind of feeling that there was consensus, or that there was a real robust discussion of ideas. And right, wrong, good, or bad, that's just how focus groups tend to be perceived. So I just want to remind you that the general goal of a focus group is to take the pulse of a group of people and to obtain some quick, efficient information. Focus groups are not deep. They do not get very far into a topic of interest, and you cannot probe them too long without having to move on. Usually, focus groups require far more lines of questioning than there ever is time to get full answers for. And it's also difficult when you have a group of, say, 9 people, and you're really grilling one person and trying to get them to open up and tell you what you want to hear. Those other 8 people are all waiting to say something, and they all feel a need to say something. So you have to be very careful in a focus group that you are mindful of the fact that it's not a depth interview. It's not an ethnography where you're really trying to gain a lot of context and understanding. It's not even observational research where you're trying to distance yourself from what you're observing and pick up things that are not immediately obvious through verbal data. In a focus group, you're just trying to collect a little bit of everything, and you're hoping that you can get something that is ultimately useful. It's kind of an interesting thought, too, that focus groups are sort of a combination of all 3 of those techniques. They have some qualities of observation to them. They have some qualities of in-depth interviewing, and they have some qualities of ethnography, at least in the setting of having a group of people together. But they're not nearly as deep or as robust or as easy to validate as those other 3 methods can be. So just keep that in mind. One thing that is really important to know if you're going to be a focus group moderator is that there is a certain behavior that groups tend to have that's known as the stages of group formation. And I've adapted this chart here from one of your readings that you're going to have, which is called Focus Groups in Marketing Research. And this chart appears in this article, but it's not actually from these authors. It goes back to a guy named Bruce Tucker who came up with this structure, and it's since been adapted to focus groups. But the stages of a focus group, and I hate the cutesy names, but it's a good structure. The stages go forming, storming, norming, performing, and mourning. And really the first 3 stages, forming, storming, and norming, happen pretty quickly in the group. Performing is where you want to get as quickly as possible, and then mourning is really what happens at the end of the group when you're trying to get things closed down. But let me just kind of go through these steps really quickly so you can understand how they work, because as a moderator myself, as someone who's observed a lot of focus groups, I can tell you that having a good understanding of this structure, it's kind of intuitive, but having a good understanding of this structure will help you to be a better moderator if you can identify what stage you're in and what you need to do to move forward. So forming is when the group is just coming together, and it might be even before the group has formally introduced itself. I think of this as being the stage where people are coming in the room, trying to find a seat, eating a bag of chips, drinking a soda, nervously sitting around, having some chit-chat, trying to figure out who each other are and why they're all there. The participants feel separate, they feel dependent, they feel anxious, they feel powerless. They're in a new situation. They don't really know how they relate to each other. They're trying to figure out how they belong to the group. And so the moderator, when the moderator comes in the room, really has to sit down and lay out the groundwork, empowering them, making them feel safe, explaining what's going to be going on, showing them how to behave by modeling the kind of behavior that you want them to follow, and really encouraging them to interact with one another. And generally, this begins by a round of introductions that are very light and very easy. Tell me a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what your family's like and what your hobbies are, those sort of things. That leads to the next stage, which is called storming. Now, storming isn't always a real pronounced stage, and in fact, it can actually be over pretty quickly. But it can also, if you have really strong personalities in the room, be a particularly difficult stage to get through. And that is where the participants in the room are trying to figure out how they relate to one another and who's in charge. They, at that point, still view the moderator as being in charge, but they're all trying to figure out what their share in the role is. Kind of trying to figure out the pecking order of who gets to speak up and who has the loudest voice and things like that. Now, a lot of this is subconscious behavior. They're not doing this consciously, but they might start challenging the moderator. The moderator will ask a question and they'll go, well, what do you mean? And they'll try to get the moderator to kind of show them the correct answer. Or they might immediately disagree with someone so that they can emphasize who they are as an individual. They might start to show some really dominant behavior, or they might start to kind of recede and be passive and try to hang back. These are all things that happen during the storming process, and you have to be really careful as a moderator to watch for those behaviors and shut them down in different ways. You have to let everybody know that all opinions are valued. You have to listen to some negative views, but then try to find positive counterbalances. You have to really shut down the potentially dominant respondents from becoming overbearing by acknowledging them, maybe thanking them, and then moving away from them and letting someone else talk for a little while, or having them have to, wait until you're ready for them to talk again. Kind of just teaching them that, no, you're not going to be the one that's running this group. I'm going to be the one that's running this group. We need to hear from everybody. And most people can figure that out pretty quickly, but some people just get really insistent that they need to continue to be the ones talking. And during the storming phases where you really have to lay that groundwork. And in rare occasions, you might have to dismiss someone if they are going to be really disruptive to a group. It's better not to do that. It's actually very disruptive to the group if you have to dismiss someone, but it does happen. Okay, so the next stage is norming. Norming is where the group is beginning to form what we call norms about how they're going to interact with each other. And this is where you start to see things coming together. There's a sense of harmony. Everybody's starting to feel like they're part of something, maybe supporting each other a little bit in how they respond. This is where the group really begins to have an almost, it can run itself kind of quality about it. People start taking turns. The moderator doesn't always have to ask them for feedback. They know when to speak up. It's where things really start to click. And once you get to that stage, the best thing you can do as a moderator is to encourage it to continue. If you have people that are doing the right thing, the way that the group needs to go forward, then you encourage them. Say, thank you. I'm really glad that you were able to speak up, Joan. Hey, Jim, can you go ahead and comment on this? Just kind of give them some cues on how to continue to follow those norms. And also, if people begin breaking rules that you've kind of set and violating those norms that you've set, gently chastising them, gently bringing them back on track so that they understand, no, this isn't the way we're going to behave. We're going to continue to follow this more harmonious path that we've figured out. You have to be flexible at this point. You still have to allow people to get into the groove, but this is also a great time to start establishing plans for what you're going to do. So ideally, norming is kind of the warm-up phase exercise. When you're doing the warm-up questions of a focus group, you should really be in that norming phase so that when you move on to the tougher stuff, you're in the performing stage. Performing is where the individuals are subservient to the group, the roles are flexible, and everybody's task-oriented. This is where you can really introduce more difficult issues, stimuli, projective techniques, written exercises, things like that are intended to challenge the group a little bit more. And at this point, once you get to the performing stage, people are concentrating, they're thinking about the group, there's a lot of energy, people are willing to do things without being asked. It's very easy to keep the group this way for about an hour, maybe an hour, 15 minutes. As long as you can keep them moving forward and keep them from getting bored, this performing stage is the sweet spot. This is where you really want to be. But towards the end of the group, as people are getting tired, as people are starting to feel confused and annoyed by the group setting, they're going to want some conclusion. And they may have trouble disbanding the group, particularly if they feel a strong connection to other people in the group. They might feel a sense of loss or anxiety, and they have a need for some closure. So you never want to end a group by just saying, well, I'm all out of questions. Thanks, folks. What you want to really do is bring it down to a point where you're narrowing them down to some questions that are easy for them to answer. Ask them for some general feedback. Maybe see if your observers have any last-minute questions, and then summarize what you went over. And in focus group research, you want to be careful that you're not really summarizing the data. You just want to summarize, here's what we did tonight. We participated in opinion research, and your opinions were heard, and they were valuable, and what you said is going to have an impact on, whatever. And, like when I do advertising research, I'll say, you may actually see this advertisement in the market in a few months, and you're going to know that you had a hand in helping to develop that. So just giving them a sense of conclusion, making sure that any other views that needed to get out are out, and then thanking them and letting them go. That's the morning phase. So as a moderator, when you are in front of a focus group, it can be a really intimidating experience, especially if you're not a people person. But you just have to get over it, and you have to be willing to be in control, and you have to be willing to follow some good practices in order to stay the head of that group. Now, what's important as a moderator is you don't want to project the idea that you're an authority figure. You want to project more the idea that you are there just to set the boundaries and to keep things in line. You're going to be asking questions, you're going to be facilitating the discussion, but you're not there to be appeased. You're not there to have your boots licked. You're there to ensure that the group continues moving forward. And in order to do that, you need to follow some of the tips that I'm going to present here. So the first thing that I would encourage you to do more than anything is to pay very close attention to everyone in the group. Look at them. Give them your full attention. Smile when they smile. Laugh when they laugh. Make sure that they understand that you're paying attention to them. Treat them as you would treat them if you were doing an interview with them. And have a laser-like focus on who they are and what it is they're saying. But at the same time, in your peripheral vision, keep an eye on other people in the group. Make sure they're not getting antsy. If you see their hand go up, acknowledge them and say, I'll be right with you. Let me finish. I want to hear what Jane has to say here. Make sure that you are aware of what else is going on in the room, that you're not so focused on one person that you exclude everyone else. But pay close attention to everyone in the group. And as a counterpoint, don't clutch papers. Don't hold papers up to hide behind, or bury yourself in taking notes, or have a little chat window on a computer that you're typing into constantly with the observers to get feedback. All of those things not only take your attention away, but they're very distracting to the group. Okay, do encourage discussion and difference of opinion rather than consensus. The point of a focus group is not to reach a consensus. In fact, you should have discussion and difference of opinion. If you don't, that means that you have something called groupthink that's set in, which we're going to talk about in the next lecture. So you do want to encourage discussion and difference of opinion. You do also, at the very beginning of the group, when you're in the, going back to our forming, storming, norming structure, you do want to, in the forming phase, make sure that you point out that the group is being observed and get the awkwardness of the group out of the way as soon as possible. And the reason for this is because people get nervous when they know they're being observed, and you just right away need to make them comfortable with it. And then they'll forget about it because they'll get focused on the group. Once they're in the performing phase, they'll completely have forgotten about the observers. But in the meantime, you just really need to make sure that they're comfortable with the fact they're being observed. So be transparent with them. I wouldn't say a client is observing them, however. I would say we have a research team that's observing us, and they're taking notes so I don't have to. They're going to make sure I'm asking the questions that I'm supposed to be asking because I forget sometimes. It makes you more human, it makes you feel more relatable, and it also justifies their existence, why they're there and why they're observing the group. That's really all you need to say about them. Do make use of exercises and anchoring techniques to break up the flow and prevent groupthink from forming. So exercises can be projectives, they could be collaging, they could be points where you just cause or have people write things down on a piece of paper, whatever it is you need them to do, just to kind of break up the question and response flow. Anchoring is a specific technique that I use quite a bit, where you actually ask them to commit something down to paper. So you have them do a written exercise or write something down on paper and then read what they wrote. And the reason that I like anchoring is because then they're telling you what they thought when you ask the question, not what they're thinking as other people are talking. So when you have them anchor something on a piece of paper and then a conversation evolves, they can go back to what they were thinking and maybe talk about it in the context of how the conversation's evolved, but you don't lose the line of thinking that they had originally as they settle into more of a groupthink kind of mode. And so it can help to keep that groupthink from forming. Do allow long silences and pauses or points where participants have to work to articulate their ideas. If you've ever been in a classroom where an instructor asks a question and leaves a long silence till someone speaks up, you know how uncomfortable that is, but there's a reason for doing it. It's because the instructor wants to see if anybody is really going to put themselves on the line to try to show what they know. Likewise, you may have been in a classroom where an instructor doesn't let a classmate off the hook. They start to answer, they don't really know what they want to say, and they're struggling to articulate it, and the instructor just nods and says, okay, keep working on it. It's very uncomfortable, but there is a purpose to it. When you are forcing people to articulate their views, you're challenging them to come up with ideas that are buried a little bit further back in their brain. And sometimes that's necessary to do in a focus group. So it is a good practice. If you are silent for long enough, someone will speak, especially if you're just nodding and waiting patiently. And if you are grilling someone long enough to articulate their ideas, they will eventually get to a conclusion. It may not be a satisfying conclusion, and it may stress them, so you do have to be careful. But it's good practice to let them articulate their own ideas before you start trying to interject your words. If someone asks you a question, make sure that you don't answer it in a focus group. One of the things you have to be really mindful of in any form of qualitative research, but particularly in focus groups where you have all these other people that are watching what you're doing, is you don't want to establish the idea that there are right and wrong answers. You're asking people to give their opinions, and so if someone asks you a question and you answer it, you're establishing the idea right there that, oh, I have the answers to things, and that's a very bad position for you to be in as a moderator. So if someone asks you a question, do your best to turn it back on them. Now, if they're asking you a question that's just something that is very small and that needs to be clarified, be deliberate about saying, I'll be happy to clarify that for you, just because I can see you're struggling with it a little bit. Let me clarify that for you, and then we're going to get back to our discussion. Make sure that you're indicating that it's a small clarification, not that you're giving the correct answer to whatever it is that they wanted to learn. And always ask them to give you feedback before you offer any clarification. When I'm doing a lot of research for hospitals or insurance companies or things like that, where the brands are a little bit murky, there are times where people want to know the name of a hospital or whatever, and it actually benefits me more to hear what they think the name is than it does for me to tell them. Because when I tell them, they sometimes realize that they've been talking about a hospital that didn't exist, and they get really embarrassed and nervous about their answers, or they start changing their answers as they realize that what they thought they were talking about was different than what they're actually talking about. It's better to let them be consistent in what they say. Okay, a few more don'ts. Don't allow your body language or words to suggest what a right answer is. I struggle with this one because I like to nod when I'm listening to people, and what I'm nodding to indicate is yes, I'm listening. But what it can indicate is yes, that's right, and that's a very dangerous body language. So, also smiling, raising your eyebrows, cocking your head, things like that. Those can all be things that can suggest what a right or wrong answer is. You need to be very conscious of that. It's better to just sit still with your hands clasped, nod once, listen, smile gently, and then look at the next person that you're going to talk to and say, what do you think about this? Keep your body language under as much control as you can. Don't allow one or more members to take control of the group by asking questions or questioning you on your views. One of the most difficult things in a focus group is when you have a participant that decides that they don't like the way you're answering questions and that they're gonna get involved and they're gonna take control. This is a normal behavior because people are used to being in meetings where they're able to do that. But a focus group is not a place where the participants should be in control. So be certain that when you cede control to them, that you get it back as quickly as possible. And certainly do not allow them to question you. If they question you, turn the questions right back on them and get control of your group back. Don't attempt to establish rapport by being phony, fake, or falsely relatable. Don't make up details to sound relatable. Don't do things that try to make you seem like you're more like the person that's talking. Just be yourself and try to be as genuine as you can. You'll be much better off if you are confidently yourself than if you're trying to be fake and phony and relate to everybody in the room. Believe me. Even if you are completely different from them, if you're genuine, they will eventually come to trust you and want to talk to you. They'll be intrigued by you. Don't use extensive body language or dramatic cues to attempt to play up the drama of the focus group. So my partner David, who you heard in the interviews in the previous lecture series, told me once about a moderator that he saw who would pace around the room and walk up behind participants and put his hands down on their chair and kind of startle them. And he was doing all these theatrics for the people in the back room. He wanted to look really dramatic and TV-like and kind of lawyerly, you know. And that is not a good way to run a focus group. You are much better just sitting still and having your hands clasped than you are getting up and pacing around the room or just gesturing wildly or anything like that. Don't play to the observers. The people in the group are the most important people you should be focused on. Don't worry about the observers. Also, don't correct wrong answers unless necessary. Now, I kind of alluded to this before, but it bears repeating. If someone says something is incorrect, don't give them signals that they said something is incorrect. Just say, okay, maybe ask them to clarify, but don't give them cues that they gave wrong answers. It's better if they give wrong answers and they're confident in the wrong answers that they gave, because that's actually useful data. You can actually do something with that. When you're asking people about their opinions and their opinions are based on perceptions that aren't based in reality, that's as important of a finding as having opinions that are based in reality. So just be aware of that. Now also remember that your observers may have an entirely different experience outside your purview. You don't get to see what your observers are seeing because you're in the group. You're focused on asking the questions that you're supposed to ask. And your observers are going to be behind the scenes talking to each other, having their own discussion, thinking differently about what they're hearing. They're probably going to be annoyed with you for asking questions that they thought were silly, or maybe chasing down avenues that they didn't think were useful. Their view of what they're seeing in the group is removed from the group. They're viewing this almost like they're watching TV. So it's hard for them to relate to the people in the room the way you're going to as a moderator. So it's important to circle back with them and see what they learned. I usually, towards the end of my groups, stop, take a quick break to let everyone go to the bathroom, get a drink, whatever, and then I go back and talk to the observers for a few minutes, find out what additional questions they have, find out if we missed anything that they really want to know, and then find out what it is that they think they've learned so that I can go back in the group and finish it off, ensuring that we got everything that they wanted to know. And then we do a debrief afterwards, and I try to learn even more about what they learned. Often, they remember things that they said in the back room as being part of the group. So I want to make sure that I can dissociate them from that and that I can keep them rooted in what we actually learned in the group and keep their own opinions out of it so that when we give them a report later on, they're not surprised. But remember, as well, if you have executives in the back room, this may be one of those few times that they actually listen to people that are their customers or stakeholders or clients or end users that they never normally listen to. And so they may be absolutely stunned by what they're hearing. They may be absolutely shocked and processing this information that they're just not used to. So there may be some really rich, deep conversations that you can have where you can not only establish yourself as being expert on the research, but you can learn more about what they want to learn in maybe the next group or the next stage of the research that you're going to be conducting. So it's always worth considering their perspective as well. Okay, so that's basic focus group techniques. In our next lecture, we're going to talk about some of the limitations and pitfalls of focus groups.